So welcome everybody. My name is Gyöngyi Horváth from GÉANT. I'm a community support officer, and I will be talking and leading you through today's InfoShare about the GÉANT Community Program, which is the second one in this series. And together with me, I have Kasper Dreef, Magda Haber, and Laura Dornford from GÉANT. And we will be organizing today's panel discussions on this topic. Just a little bit of information about the InfoShares. Like, we have created this series of InfoShares with the purpose of providing you with a space to engage and improve on knowledge sharing and having discussions about services and strategic topics. These InfoShares are recorded, so please bear in mind when you are sharing your video or sound. And I also would like to mention to you that we will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, then please put it in the chat box. At today's agenda of the InfoShare is we will start with a brief introductions about the community program, which will be followed by a panel discussions with between Laura, Magda, and Kasper to discuss about the value, the outcomes, and about the participations in the community program activities and the future after COVID. We will finish today's InfoShare with how to join an activity and how to create an activity itself. And finally, we will open the floor for questions from your side. Just for those who are not very familiar with, although I think many of you are, what do we mean by the GÉANT community? Those are members of the GÉANT Association, National Research and Education Networks, associate partners, user organizations and users, international organizations, subject matter experts from commercial and non-commercial companies. And what are the community program activities are? What do? We are enabling collaboration, like for the development of the next generation networking technologies and services. We explore emerging issues and solutions in R&E networking, develop strategies and solutions to address them. We produce and test fresh, innovative ideas, listen and talk to our users, and to support them in their everyday work and to develop together a better solution and services. This is the vision and the mission statement from the GÉANT Community Program. What we want to achieve is to have a connected, collaborative, and harmonized research and education networking community. And we want to provide for that a condition to collaborate both face-to-face and virtually, and creating mechanisms to enable participation and inclusion for all. This is the activities of the community program. The community program has an oversight committee, which is the GÉANT Community Committee. There are all senior experts, subject matter experts from the community itself, and they provide a voluntary contribution for this oversight. The program itself is built up by task forces and special interest groups, specialized workshops, collaborative projects, innovation program, and community award itself. For the task forces and specialized interest group, what is the difference? The task forces are usually fixed term. They have a specific task and the tangible deliverables at the end. Whereas the specialized interest groups are usually long-term. Their purpose is community building. They have a common practice and best practice knowledge exchange, and they are specialized around a topic or a thematic area. For the specialized workshop as an example are the network performing arts production workshop or the public affairs workshop. They address the needs from the community. They usually are once or twice a year, or even like 2 times per year. And for the collaborative projects, they are usually initiated by a member or individuals, and they are created for a specific project where there is a need for a support from GÉANT side. Those support can be by funding or coordination or providing the actual infrastructures to support these projects. Some of the examples are RIFETS, BICE, GLIF, or the Global Eduroam Governance Committee. And since early this year, we also have a new initiative, a new activity, which is the innovation program. GÉANT and the members, they allocated funding to support new innovative ideas. And this year we have received around 26 proposals, and from them 10 was successful, where the results will be shared with you early next year. And the next round will be open for us a call in January. And finally, about the community award, we would like to recognize the members of the community for their contributions for the research and education networking. And that is happening usually at TNC. The community program has 9 thematic areas currently. They always address the needs of the community itself. These activities, these thematic areas are the network services and technologies, security, trust and identity, media services, cloud services, organizational services, research engagement and development, educational services and technologies, and the new area is health. And how do they build into the program in actual activities? In this chart, you will see what we mean by each activities per area, thematic area. So for example, for the organization and support, we have marketing and communication, management of service portfolios, task force on research and education development. And for the networking, we have the next generation networking SIG and the network operations center SIG, which have a broader community around that, which is the global Lambda integrated facility. For identity and privacy, we have a new task force, which is the distributed ledger technologies. And 2 collaborative projects around it is the Research and Education Federation Group and the Global Eduroam Governance Committee. For security, we have SIG-ISM and TFC CERT. SIG-ISM is Information Security Management, and TFC CERT is a Computer Security Incident Response Team. With this last one, I would like to mention that this is the only task force where you require accreditation. All of the other activities are open for anybody who is interested in the topic or a subject matter expert itself. And they are also brought together by VICE, which is the Global Trust Community. And then the next one is health. Health has a new task force, is TFE Health, which also just started this year, which brings in this new area to the community program. For the cloud, we have SIG-KISS, which is a cloudy interoperable software stacks, which is again brought together by the Open Cloud Mesh activities. For education, since 2020, we started Task Force on Education. And for media, we have SIG Multimedia. It's brought together by collaborative workshops, which is the Network Performing Arts Production Workshop. And this is the current portfolio. It can change again by the needs of the community. And with this one, I hope I gave you a very short, very brief overview of the community program itself. And now I would like to invite my colleagues to the panel discussion. Casper Dreef, Laura Durnford, Magda Haver. So welcome to today's InfoShare, and thank you for joining to the panel. I would like to start with telling you all that Casper, Laura, and Magda cumulatively represent around 32 years of experience and expertise coordinating task forces and specialized interest group. Welcome today. My first question to you would be, could you please share with the audience what evidence have you seen that the community program provides in terms of any value for the strategic or professional work for the participants? Magda, can you maybe start?
Sure. So I coordinate 2 groups. One is SIG-NOC, which is for network operation centers. And the second one is SIG-MSP, which is management of services portfolios. So these are 2 very different groups. One very technical, the second one is strategic and business related. And the slide you see is the quotes that represents the quotes that we asked the participants to share, and the members of the steering committee as well. And you do see the benefits that are listed that involve both technical and not technical groups, but in the same time, they highlight very, very similar benefits. So as you see, participation at the SIGs is mainly a source of inspiration for them. It's about making progress quicker. It's about sharing and receiving feedback and discussing topics with like-minded people. Yeah, and as I said, it's both technical and business related.
Maybe I can jump in here. So we in Sigmarcoms, the Marketing Communications Group, we always do a survey in every meeting to ask about what people have found useful topics within those meetings, and we get inputs back from that. That's very useful for the steering committee to help form the agendas and so on, but also we sometimes then anecdotally hear later that they've used some of the topics in their day-to-day work as well. So that's quite handy.
Yeah, and I think, and thank you for having us today, Gyungi, by the way. I think it's very good to keep in mind that these groups actually exist because the community wants to have a place where it can have these discussions on these thematic areas just presented by Gyungi. So I think that having such a place is already very, very valuable in itself.
I think also the fact that there are some people in some of the groups who've been there for very many years, to me suggests that they certainly see value in staying there for their day-to-day work, otherwise they wouldn't keep coming. And also I think because some of the topics come around time and again, especially when it comes to things like strategic planning and how best to do that kind of thing, I think it just goes to show that there is value in having those discussions, otherwise people wouldn't keep coming back to those topics to see how they develop and what they can learn from each other. So I think it's very valuable to see that people do get these benefits in their day-to-day work as well.
Thank you, Laura. Can you, Kasper, maybe share some thoughts about what they have in common?
Yeah, so although these thematic areas are quite different, what all these task forces and special interest groups have in common is that they are by the community and for the community. So yeah, what do you do at the forum is, yeah, you share ideas, best practices, you can discuss strategic viewpoints, share tips and tricks, but it's also a place where you can ask questions to your peers and start collaborations. I think that's also of great value.
Magda, do you have maybe something else to add?
Yeah, so I think the main value is for the participants really being there together, feeling safe, feeling that they're in a trusted environment, and they like hearing about different experiences of other NRENs, about similarities, about differences, about different circumstances, challenges, you know, budgets, skills, solutions. So it's plenty of that. So it's really about learning from each other and progressing faster. I don't know if you want so there are also, of course, specific examples of something that comes out from these meetings. So oh yeah, here it showed up as a quote. It's about the tool survey. So tool survey is something that SIGNOC has been doing. We had 3 of these tool survey so far. They're all led by our wonderful Maria Isabel Cantia. And these are the surveys that allows operators to see what others are using for certain functions. So for example, monitoring and ticketing. So it's a knowledge sharing to avoid pitfalls, and also it's to keep up-to-date information for the NOC community. So as I said, it's an example of a very concrete outcome of these meetings.
Yes, and we've also saw that in TF-RED, which actually stands for Research Engagement Development. They have in the past been creating guidelines and interviews, and in that way they shared their knowledge on how to do research engagement.
Yeah, and in Sigmarcoms, there's a few of these quotes come from Sigmarcoms. We try and take a very practical approach in parts of the meetings where we do like a mini workshop or so on. Sometimes we go into more depth in a separate meeting, for example, on GDPR for marketing communications, the web content accessibility guidelines. And yeah, So there's some examples here of where people have taken inspiration home on how to promote Eduroam or make a strategic approach to doing their surveys, incorporating metrics, or how to interact better with the HR department in their NREN to support their communications needs as well. And yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I remember hearing in one meeting how somebody was so inspired hearing what Arnes had done with a sort of funny cartoon newspaper to celebrate their anniversary, that somebody else decided to adapt that approach for something they were doing as well. So there are these concrete examples here and there.
Yeah, what they may also add, so for example, for MSP, so it's always and mainly about life cycle of products and services, right? So it's about to compare which services are coming out, which services are ending, how to improve, etc. But there are certain areas that keep coming back, and there is a background. So we always cover trust and identity, clouds, network and security. Of course, the very recent topic and theme that has been coming is the COVID and, for example, EU COVID funds. Another topic that has been showing up through many meetings was connectivity to schools.
Thank you, Magda. Maybe some of you are something more concrete examples, like you are very familiar with the best known example or idea that was discussed, and that is fully grown into an actual service and offering. It's Eduroam. Do you have maybe some other examples?
Yeah, so Eduroam was an idea that was brought to an old task force, TF Mobility, and discussed and developed there. I think around that time there was also another trust and identity task force, TF EMC squared, that helped develop the REFEDS community, and things that came out of that. Also then the tools such as SHAC and TACAR and EduPKI. And I understand that the In Academia service was something that was also discussed in these kinds of groups originally before moving into the GÉANT project. And yeah, by the way, that team you may have seen just announced recently its 1 millionth transaction this calendar year for students getting online discounts in a privacy preserving way using this tool. So that's a real concrete outcome and benefit for the target audience for that work.
Yeah, and there are of course more, one of which is EduMeet, which was firstly discussed in TF Multimedia, how it was called back then. And even after it was adopted by the GÉANT project, the special interest group kept helping with the development by tracking the needs of the service and the actual development of the service. But there are more examples also from other groups, like the Open Cloud Mesh initiative that came from TF Storage, or a presentation on funding opportunities at SIGKIS led to the unpronounceable CS3 mesh for EOSC project. And also in the cloud space that, although it wasn't created in the TF, but in TF Storage gave a lot of inputs for the development of the service called File Sender.
Thank you.
I can think of some other examples. So, for example, MSP has developed an idea for a future case for NRENs that my dear friend John Dyer worked on, and that resulted in a first report, and then inspired the full website, and then the following reports. And it was all about why NRENs are necessary and offer value. So it was an example from MSP. Another thing that comes to mind is from TFC CERT, transit trainings. Oh yeah, so this is something I've been coordinating for a few years now, and there are wonderful trainings that have been developed from this specific task force. So it's all for the computer security incident response teams, and transit trainings have trained now nearly 2,000 people since 2001 that they started existing. and therefore the newcomers to the security teams of both NRENs and also some other governmental organizations, even commercial banks. So there are all these new young enthusiastic people meeting and learning. We have different modules. And also we also developed the transits too, which is for more advanced personnel, and they're being run once a year.
Yeah, transit is a really great place to be at, and as a trainer myself, there is I can only confirm what Magda is saying. But that's not the only thing that sprung out of the UFC cert. They also developed the Trusted Introducer, which is a registration and accreditation service for these security response teams. And the funny thing is that some of these best practices from Trusted Introducers are at the moment being adopted by the GÉANT security team. So you can see the cross-pollination there. But there are more community proposals that lead into services such as the Trusted Certificate Service. And not only services, but also community building that sprung from these community program activities, which Jungi already mentioned was WISE, which was initiated by the Special Interest Group on Information and Security Management, SICK-ISM.
Security is something that's come up in the marketing communications group as well, because it covers everything that that NRENs are busy with. Excuse me. So yeah, a few years ago there were discussions about security, crisis management, that kind of thing, and yeah, somebody in that group actually proposed that the community program could support workshops for NRENs, so that technical experts and communications people could come together to discuss crisis management and communications. And as it happens, today is the start of the 5th one of these CLAW workshops. So that's quite nice timing. And another example from the Marcoms group, the community newsletter, now known as Connect, goes out to around 930 people every week and gets contributions from all across our wider community. I think we've had 60 or so posts since July that are not created by GÉANT organization. So, excuse me, that's something that has a very concrete impact on the community that came out of that group.
Yeah, I mean, the topics are always and ever evolving. So we do have common themes, but then if I think of MSP, so it's always about, products and services. But we've been discussing recently, for example, data transfer. Atlassian even came to the picture, open source, EduSign, and the topics that have showed up before and were very present were, for example, procurement, CRM, updates on GÉANT Compendium. So it's always something new.
Yeah, I think it's important to excuse me, understand that the topics within groups change, but also the groups change, as you said earlier, Junji. The portfolio of the topics changes, and now we're back to having a trust and identity group again. DLT, I think, was the name, and the e-health one again. So the needs of the community keep changing, and the ideas keep changing, and we try and reflect that in the groups. And really, it's the sharing and developing ideas together, which is what these groups are all about.
Thanks for all of you for these examples. Do you have maybe other examples of topics or work area that moved from a task force or special interest group into the GÉANT project or other funded activity?
I think quite a few of the things we've just discussed are already examples of that. One thing I can think of is maybe slightly different kind of example, where actually a whole topic area moved out of the community program and into a project, and that is the trust and identity area, because having had several task forces years ago, suddenly there were none, because that work was really taken up in the GÉANT project, and more recently there's been ARC project, My Academic ID, and EDSI, which is now the one going on now. And in the projects, then they obviously develop and extend the work, make services operational and run them, and so on. But there's also the new thing, the Trust and Identity Incubator in the GÉANT project, and so it's interesting to see that's come back into the list now. So we're obviously going through the next evolution in the trust and identity area, I think. But yeah, it's a slightly different kind of example, perhaps.
Yeah, and also doesn't always have to be in a project, because we noticed that, well, there was always a close relationship between the work done in TF Red and the GÉANT research engagement team, and all the activities they are involved in.
Yeah, I mean, there are close relationships between the community program activities and the GÉANT projects, but the work of TFs and SIGs can be about everything and anything that NRENs need to discuss, and other participants as well. So I want to stress that GÉANT project is not the one that chooses the agenda. It's strictly the work of the steering committees and really result of discussions of whatever is being born during the meetings. Having said that, I can think of many examples that helped and contributed to certain areas of work in the project. So for example, in 2016, there was the adoption of infrastructure as a service. In 2020, there was OCRE cloud tender. Another example was introduction of service metrics to the compendium. These were all started during the MSP meetings.
Yeah, no, I agree very much. So the groups are really an important channel for the community to work together at grassroots level, and that can complement what's going on formally within projects, but it can also be separate and aside from that. And the groups can support developments in the projects. For example, within Sigmarcoms, we've been having quite a high representation from some of the regional networking projects, which helps them to succeed in their goals, as well as boosting the variety of inputs within the SIG group itself. And of course, the technical projects and service developments and so on, there's always an interaction between the groups and what's going on in the projects, because especially in our area, we want to know what needs promoting and how do we understand how to do that and those kinds of things. And the projects bring topics to the groups, like we heard some examples already. Another one I can think of is the Cybersecurity Month campaign on social media that the GÉANT project team brought to Sigmarcoms, and that's become a community activity for the last few years as well.
Thank you all. Like we talked, I think, quite a lot about concrete and tangible outputs from the community program activities, but we haven't yet talked about non-tangible effects. Do you maybe have some examples from it, like some quotes maybe?
Yeah, I can think of or feel it. As it's not tangible, then it's difficult to describe perhaps. But as it's called community program, what comes to mind first is really creating the sense of community. So we have the quotes here that do confirm that. And what I wanted to stress, it's not only about the meetings. Of course, the meetings are a beautiful, great value for people coming together, but we also have mailing lists. We have also the collaborative wiki pages, and this is all where all the community members come together. So they come together to share, they come together to build their international connections, to build trust. It's like this not being alone feeling, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Magda. It's about developing that trusted network, that those personal relationships with others, and see that people are facing the same challenges as you are, or sharing solutions, best practices, as we mentioned earlier, and learn about what worked for others, so that you could implement that into your own day-to-day working life.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we focus a lot on what's, for example, on the agenda of a meeting. But I think when the groups are meeting, especially, of course, face-to-face, it's the conversations that happen around that, like in the lunch break or sort of over a drink in the evening or something like that, where actually people really get to know each other on a more personal level to establish that real trust, but also where you find out about other things that are going on in their organization that maybe weren't on the agenda and that can be very useful to know about as well. And yeah, I mean, the kind of information, I remember somebody always used to ask about the budget for everything, so they could go back to their boss and say, well, so-and-so's got a bigger budget for doing this kind of work, I need a bigger budget for this kind of work. So, you know, there's all kinds of ways in which those conversations can benefit the participants, I think. But I do think it's interesting to see in the comments that we collected that, you know, a lot of the focus is on the community, the networking, the trust side of it as well.
I'm also thinking how now it used to be, and hopefully it will be soon again, you know, to go to physical meetings that happen most often at NRENs location. So it's wonderful when we go to a certain country, visit an NREN, and then it's really opportunity to get closer to this NREN, to get to know people better, to get presentation about their operations. It doesn't need to be exactly only around the theme of the meeting, but we normally start with a presentation of the host NREN. And it gives opportunity also for this NRENs employees who normally would not join a meeting, but not as they are already there and they're hosting. So they participate, and then they get appetite, and sometimes they join the future meetings of ours. So that's really nice to be at the NRENs premises.
Thank you. Do you have maybe some other examples when NRENs are collaborating with each other outside of the community group meetings, but based on the results, or basically as a result of their contacts from there?
I would say yes, although this is a little bit more difficult. We do have a few examples, but it's difficult because we don't really measure this. But sometimes when you're at a meeting, you hear that someone has been talking to others, and they mention that in their presentation, or you hear that during lunch, which is a very important part, as Laura just mentioned.
Yeah, it's, you know, sometimes, as Casper said, it's difficult to measure because so people meet during this SIX and TFs meetings, but then the collaboration happens often outside. So let's say we discuss certain products and services, and then the two NRENs or 3 or 5 are interested to further talk about it outside of the meeting. So they're arranging the calls, one-on-ones, and they follow up on that. Sometimes we see also beautiful initiatives of like bigger NRENs, more experienced, offering their help to smaller ones. So they offer, you know, help. They said, okay, let's have a one-on-one call, and I will tell you, me bigger NREN, how I deal with that, so your smaller NREN can benefit in the future.
Yeah, I think these examples on the screen are quite interesting because I think these are all from MSP, if I'm correct, Magda. But you know, one of these quotes is referring to how they're meeting with organizations from other world regions that they wouldn't normally get to meet because they've met them in the SIG or the task force. Another one's about how they followed up on specific services. Another one's about working together on a sort of community communication channel, and so on. And I think, to my mind, the fact that these kinds of interactions are happening outside the community program groups, the meetings themselves, doesn't mean that there's less value in the meetings and the community program. It actually means it's really doing what it's there to do, which is helping to make these connections and build these relationships so that these kinds of follow-ups can happen more easily. And so I think that's really a sign of the health and the value of the community program, in my opinion. So that's even better.
Thanks, Laura, for mentioning it, because it brings up my next question, which is like, if the NRENs collaborate with each other outside of the community program activities and group meetings, what do the meetings actually provide us additional benefits? Maybe shall we start with you, Magda?
Yeah, oh yeah, this is what you see on the left side of the slide. So that's a beautiful poster that has been created for one of the TNCs in 2018, I think, that presents all the work by SIG NOC. So in the center, we have the knowledge exchange at the meetings. So that's really the core. and how these meetings are organized. So there is like this beautiful energy, and then we do it in a way to integrate, of course, the best practices, presentations. We invite normally sometimes industry members, one per meeting, to share their views. We have flash talks. Flash talks are to promote new ideas, new services that often later result in some more profound services and themes, etc. Yeah, there was an idea of training preparations, the round tables. Round tables is always like to create really this interaction and discussion. And what was also introduced now during this online meetings, so we tried to, with SIGNOC, to promote more social activities as well. So we normally leave a little piece at the end for whoever wants to stay, just to hang around, you know, or show us your balcony, or grab a tea or a beer and just let's have some informal chat. So this is like this, yeah, so what the meetings represent.
Yeah. Well, you can see there's some SIG Marcoms examples here as well, so I'll talk about those quickly. So we mentioned earlier about the differences between task forces and SIGs, and so the Marcoms group was originally a task force. When it became a SIG, which is not about creating actual deliverables together, but more focusing on the value of the best practice exchange and so on, we decided that we really needed to make sure that the meetings delivered that kind of value. So we put a lot of effort into trying to make the meetings as interactive as possible, whether it's face-to-face or online. And so we've experimented with a whole lot of different formats in recent years. I won't go through all of them in detail, but for example, a flipped panel, which was, instead of having experts on the panel answering questions, we had, in that case, actually technical people from different NRENs asking questions of the Marcoms people who were in the audience, so they could take that information back to their organizations. We regularly have an open space session, Challenge Us to Your Challenges, where people can just come without slides or anything and just get the benefit of some ideas and feedback from everybody there. Excuse me, Magda mentioned the sort of personal side. In an online meeting recently, we realized that we've got new members joining who've never met each other face to face, and we wanted to actually build up that personal contact. So we had a session of introducing yourself, but you had to do it in the form of a meme representing how you see yourself and your work in the COVID era, and those kinds of things. So we try and take a playful approach, anything to avoid death by PowerPoint, to be honest with you, and see how that goes.
And we as coordinators of these activities, we also regularly meet to share these ideas and best practices. I keep saying best practices quite often, and then we'll try to incorporate that into our own meetings, although these solutions should fit the purpose. So that's also why we, as coordinators, are collaborating closely with the activity chairs and steering groups, steering committees, so that these solutions for meetings fit the group purpose and the dynamics of the group.
Yeah, thank you for these many examples. I think actually like one thought came to my mind, which you were not really yet mentioning, is basically the different ideas of how you structure a meeting, or like the flip panel, what was mentioned, like the social drinks, what mentioned by Magda as well. They are also adopted by our community members on their own organization and their own meetings. And they are especially useful now that everybody is virtual, to make the death by PowerPoint less bad experience for the virtual meetings for most of you. We talked a lot about the structure, the tangible outputs and the non-tangible outputs, but I just want to come back to the community program itself. Like, is it really just for the GÉANT and European NRENs, or the GÉANT member organizations? Can you please share some thoughts on that?
Well, I think you've already briefly touched on that, but it's not at all just for the European NRENs. It's also for the NRENs, the global NRENs and partners. and they join either regularly or on an ad hoc basis. But it's also not just for NRENs, it's also for universities and research organizations. Magda already mentioned that SIGNOC invites commercial parties from time to time to their meetings, but also other EN research infrastructures they are all more than welcome to participate. And what was mentioned earlier, these groups are basically open for everyone in the wider community, everyone with the relevant experience or the interest or the resources. There's only one exception though, and that is TFC cert.
Yeah. And I think it's important actually to realize that the mailing lists offer a way for people to keep an eye on what's going on with the groups, receive information, maybe see if there are questions going back and forth, maybe discussions on the mailing lists, find collaboration partners for something specific, and all those other ways in which they can participate and be part of that group community, even if they can't always get to meetings or never get to meetings. And I find it quite interesting that I think if we looked at any particular group's mailing list, you'll actually see there's probably quite a large number of people who never come to the meetings, but they're on the mailing lists anyway. So they're obviously finding some kind of value in at least seeing what's going on within those groups. Otherwise, why would they keep getting the emails? And the value, of course, of the mailing list is anybody anywhere in the world can join those conversations and be part of that.
Yeah, right, it's right. So the mailing lists made me think of one of the very active members of SIG-MSP, and I see Sandren is mentioned on this slide. So it's Cassandra from Sandren. She's never been to any face-to-face meetings. She's in South Africa. She's been to TNCs, but not to the SIG. But nevertheless, she's actively participating in our mailing lists and shows up very often in virtually, even when the meetings were face-to-face. And Cassandra provided us with many very valuable quotes, and she stresses the value that these MSP meetings brought to her organizations, to Sandren. So she said it's really gives her a sense of belonging to this international community with similar challenges. There has been a strategic value. She says that these meetings helped her in developing some services like data transfer or introducing cloud services in Sandren. So it is very tangible presence of these international partners as well. And then I can think of that, the COVID times actually helped to bring more broader community to the meetings as well. So we do notice participation from further away places.
Yes, thanks. I think I actually also noticed it based on the statistics. I was preparing it in this year and comparing it with last year. We have seen the growing participation over the years. And maybe it's also thanks to COVID. I'm not sure. In general, it was always growing a bit every year. But do you have maybe some examples of how COVID had an impact on the groups and the meetings itself and its value, and what implications can be for the future of the groups after COVID?
Yeah, it's very safe to say that COVID has had quite an impact, a fundamental impact on the NRENs. Not only for the services and the networks, but I would say specifically to the relationships with others and with their stakeholders and the other communities. And yeah, we see that reflecting in the topics discussed within the community program activities, for sure.
I think SIG-Marcom's marketing communications being one of those functions of an NREN that's not its core business, but supports everything. The whole impact of COVID across these different areas of NRENs is something that SIG-Marcoms has been tracking and discussing in various ways since COVID began. So we've seen effects on company culture, internal communications challenges, recruiting and retaining staff, and all kinds of different ways. So I think as a community, there's going to actually still be a lot to digest even after COVID ends, because of the potential, the knock-on effects of those impacts, actually.
Yeah, so Of course, what COVID brought in terms of meetings is that we became so much more efficient to be online. And it does have its pros. For example, as I said before, you know, more people from further away places are coming because it doesn't cost money, because it's easier, the meetings are shorter, they're more inclusive. In the same time, a lot of our members mentioned that the interaction is much more limited. The human aspect is so much missing. We cannot visit anymore these NRENs premises. So many of my people would like to come back face to face.
Yeah, I understand that. I think everybody likes to meet face to face. On the other hand, though, I think I've got an interesting example here from Sigma Comms. I think you know, we've actually learned a lot in the COVID era, and one of the challenges is going to be how we sustain and apply the best things that we've learned after we've go back to face-to-face meetings. So this slide here, we normally do a survey in every meeting to say, you know, what have people found valuable, but we also ask them to rate the meetings. And interestingly, you can see here an average from meetings before and just, you know, since COVID. And we always had a good score, if you like, marks out of 5 stars. But in fact, the average rating has increased since we went to purely online meetings. You can also see that the average number of participants has increased as well. So I find it quite interesting that this approval rating has actually improved. So as I say, I think, you know, that's probably a good sign that we're on the right track with trying to apply these interactive ways of doing things and keeping the meetings engaging and short, being one of the main bits of feedback. But as I say, I think the challenge is going to be, how do we actually keep up these new sort of approaches and relationships and so on once we go back to face-to-face.
So interesting to see, because you know, SIGMSP, for example, as well as SIGNOC, are really very much looking forward to these face-to-face meetings. It's interesting to see that Sigma Comms actually have a rating the online meetings in a very positive way as well. So there are mixed feelings, and we need to see what happens hopefully soon after COVID, how we do that, if we do some hybrid version, or we just see what fits best each group.
Yeah, so it's mixed feelings, I would say, and if we go back and with the perspective of the community members, we can see some positive feedback on this on the left, but there's also some negatives, of course, and that's portrayed in the quotes on the right. But I agree with Magda when she said, well, it's a process. To figuring out of what each group needs and wants after we move back to a new normal world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you very much, all of you. Now I have one extra question to you all. We talked about the community program, the activities, tangible, non-tangible outputs, and the quotes from the members itself, but we haven't talked about your own experiences. Could you please share like how each of you have experienced over this combined 32 years being part of the community program, and what have you learned or benefited as a result of your participation in these activities?
Well, first of all, 32 years is a very long time. I mean, I'm 31 years old, so 32 years is quite a lot.
32 years, yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think most importantly, what I've learned is that the different characters and backgrounds of the participants in the groups are actually very beneficial to the R&D community, because looking at challenges from different perspectives and with different approaches, I think that helps to come up with better solutions in the long run. I think that's the most important thing I've learned over the years.
I think for me, if I split it into sort of more personal and more professional things, I think I have also benefited in the same way that the participants seem to have benefited. You know, I've learned valuable things I can apply in my work, in the other parts of the work I do within GÉANT. I know people in the community that I can call upon, I can email them, we've developed friendships, all of those really great things. I think on a professional level too, obviously lots of tips and tricks for trying to make the meetings and so on themselves more interesting, but also I've really come to value how valuable it is to have actively engaged members of the community in these groups, because, you know, we really rely on people to be in the steering committee, someone to chair the committees who are active and are going to help take on the load of thinking about the agendas and all of those kinds of things. We can't do that all by ourselves. And so I think that's one of the most important things I've realized. And just like to add my thanks to those that you expressed earlier in thanking the people who do that in our community, actually.
What it gave me is, I will repeat, sense of community, definitely. So I entered the words that I never thought I could enter, like network operations center. You know, I'm not a technical lady at all, you know that. but then I am in these meetings and I am learning things. But what it really gives me is this value of being together, of seeing same and new people every time. And this feeling of trust, of sharing, of being together, of learning, of seeing this big picture, you know, aiming for something bigger in light of collaboration.
Maybe I could just add one thought as well. I think what I've also seen over the years is how much community members appreciate having a place where they can get together and discuss things that's not part of if you like, a formal structure like being within a project, but where they can come with their own needs and ideas and set the agendas according to those as well. So yeah, I think that's been quite an insight as well.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. So before I finish with the panel, I would like to really thank you. Thanks to the chairs, thanks to the steering committee members, and thanks to the community members themselves for providing ideas, suggestions, and helping the community program to be shaped and evolve over the last years. So thank you, Laura, thank you, Kasper and Magda, for participating at today's panel and giving examples, concrete examples of the outputs. And now I would like to move to the last part of the InfoShare for today, and that will be about a community award first. So in 2022, we will be opening up the community award again, as mentioned before, that exists already for quite some years. It started in 2012, and since then, 18 members of the committee was awarded. The community award recognizes and honors people who have shared their ideas, expertise, and time with the community. And just one example, like last year, or this year actually, 2001, awardee was from the Network Operations Center, from representing SIGNOC, Maria Isabel Gandia Carriedo. She won the award in 2001 for her impactful contribution to the GÉANT project and wider community activities over the sustained period of time. And this is also a call for you all that in January we will open up the nomination for being recognized. So please keep an eye for that and nominate and recognize one of your members. And the other one I want to also highlight, I mentioned as one of the top peers of the community program, is the innovation program. We will be opening a new call in January for the innovation program again. So please share with your networks and the potential universities you're working together. And if you have also yourself a brilliant idea, you can reach out to us and find out if that's relevant for the next year's call for nominations for projects. And we are opening it again in January. And the final part of today's InfoShare is about how to join an activity and how to create an activity. Just to give you some thoughts and ideas. So for creating an activity, this chart shows the life cycle, what happens from an idea, starting from an idea. So if somebody, a person or a couple of members, they have an idea what they would like to discuss and initiate an activity around it. Then first of all, they usually organize a workshop or a birds of a feather session, 1 or 2, to see if there is enough interest from the other community members to do something more actively. And if there is enough, then they will start creating a new task for a special interest group. They refine the idea, the objectives, what the group would discuss and tackle. They formulate the vision, and eventually it can even evolve into a prototype or a prototype of service or a prototype of a tool itself. And once that's evolved into a prototype, then moves out of the GÉANT Community Program and it becomes a project. It can scale up. By project, it means that it can either become part of the GÉANT project, or it can find another project where it would fit nicely into, or create on its own project separately. And if that scales up and successful, then it can become operational, it can become a sustainable service. And once that's not no more need and interest for it, then it can phase out. And that's creating an idea. And for joining an activity, there are various ways. Of course, it has been mentioned by my colleagues. And anybody who is interested in joining any of these groups mentioned before, they can join the mailing list and subscribe to it, or participate in meetings, either just as a participants or become a little bit more active. They can suggest topics, or they can even become promoted or invited, be a steering committee members and actively shape the agenda creation of these groups. And just to highlight again, the community program is a grassroots activity. It is not only representing the GÉANT association views and agendas. It also not only just the GÉANT project activities, but it is really based on the steering committees which is built up of the community, and they create these activities, they create the agendas. And of course, we as GÉANT, we help to coordinate them and support them as much as possible. And with this one, I would like to open the floor to you all. If you have any questions and if you would like to discuss something to all of us. So I stopped sharing. I didn't see questions yet in the chat box, but you can also raise your hand and then I will highlight. And until like maybe people will start asking questions, maybe I would like to invite, if he doesn't mind, the chair of the GÉANT Community Committee to say a few words. Claudio Alocchio from GAR, he is the current chair, and maybe he can say a few words. Thank you, Claudio.
Well, thank you all for the InfoShare. I mean, it gave quite an inside view of what happened also behind the curtain, because normally you see what happens when you go to a meeting, but here you got the occasion to see what happens behind the scenes as well, and what is the effect of it. Well, Georgi mentioned very quickly in the last part of it also a couple of things which are important, and I will really stress a bit more. I mean, the last one was the innovation program. Last year, if you are not a member of General Assembly, you did not see my presentation, but last year we had quite a lot of submissions. We had, I think, 23, if I'm not wrong, proposals out of it, and we approved 10 of them. We only approved 10 of them because we ended up without money. The money to award the proposal was finished. And it only took less than 4 months to do that, because we started in May and at the end of June, the money was over. And now we have 10 very good proposals which are delivering things to us. And the impact of that was much better than expected. Most of them came from the users, not only from NRENs, but really from the community. So the organization which were awarded were university, research institutions, and so on, and a few NRENs. So it means that is really the community. So we are going to try to make it even wider and better this year. So be prepared and ready to share this with your community inside your own country as well. The other thing is the award, the GÉANT award for being a prominent member of the community. We are working on a better maybe way of handling it. So you may think of something like the Oscar nominee award for films, for example, where there is nominations from the community, where people is nominated, the nomination is public and so on. And via that one, then you also get a reward even if you don't win, but you are nominated. So the process will be different, will be more open, more clear, and etc. So be prepared to nominate people, think about it, and so on.
Then I would like to thank first of all my colleagues, Casper, Laura, Magda, and Claudio, for helping to share with you the knowledge and experience about the community program. And thank you all of you for participating. If you have any questions to us, then please, of course, send us an email. I will also put my email address in the chat box, so you can also email me if you find it more comfortable and ask questions about the community program or what we have presented. So with this one, I wish you a very nice December and early January, because I don't know if I see you before, and hope to see you next year or at the next special interest group or task force meetings.
Thank you, Gyeonggi, and be ready
Thank
for
you.
the Community Award nomination and the Innovation Program proposals. They're really coming out as a Christmas gift.